I'm going to be covering this from several aspects because whenever something like this happens, I'm extremely naturally questioning as to the timeline of everything and everything that's going on simultaneously with it, right? Not everything, of course, is a false flag, but at the same time, you have to think about how these certain incidents that happen are used to further take away our civil liberties every single time and our civil rights. And mass shootings have a tendency to do that, to bring up the talk about gun control again, to talk about how America has a problem with white supremacy, particularly with this shooter that was an 18-year-old avowed white supremacist. And it's kind of interesting because I read the entire 180-page manifesto. I did skim over the parts about the guns because that wasn't really relevant to the information that I'm presenting today, but everything else that was written out. And I have some parts of it here that we're going to go over, but the politicians and mainstream media have been condemning him as a white supremacist shooter that shot 10 and killed 10 people in Buffalo and injured several others. And they have simultaneously been dismissing that this person had a lot of connections and different and similar beliefs to what members of the Azov battalion and the other Nazi elements in Ukraine have. So there was a lot of hypocrisy going on, and we're going to discuss some of that. So just basically, first, we're going to go over the basic facts of what happened, because I guess you do have to start with like the basic facts. So this 18-year-old shot and killed 10 people in Buffalo, New York, and it was called the Tops Friendly Market where this took place, and 11 out of the 13 people shot were Black, okay? And a lot of people are now claiming, right, this is a hate crime. This is motivated by race. And this isn't the first time this has happened. This happened at the church before. We've had this happen at a synagogue. So this isn't anything new in terms of that. This is why all of those incidents that happened were also used to put out the domestic violent extremists that we saw in 2020 after the January 6th attacks. So allegedly, he had made this manifesto, right, describing his motive and why he was going to do that. And according to CNN, the statements were clear and filled with hate towards the Black community. Investigators uncovered other information from search warrants indicating that he was studying previous hate attacks and shootings, which he did. He named several other people that shot had mass shootings, including some of the more predominant names that we've seen in the last recent years. And so the victims were between the ages of 20 and 86. And among them was a former police officer who tried to stop the shooter, who was in his 80s. And he was the one that was outside and then went inside to try to get him. So the suspect was identified as Peyton S. Gendron. He is an 18-year-old from Cockland, New York. He drove several miles to actually get there. And he wrote his white supremacist manifesto online and live streamed the whole thing. So we have the video, but we can't show the video on YouTube because we would get taken down, because it's been taken down everywhere. And so they think this is a hate crime, and he surrendered to police. He had the gun to his neck, and then he took it down and surrendered, and he's being charged with first-degree murder, and he pled not guilty. Even though we're going to see in his manifesto, he said he would plead guilty. And they say he's under a suicide watch. Now, Kathy Hochul, one of the most authoritarian governors of the entire country, said that they were giving $2.8 million in federal funding for the victims and their families. And this is what she said, and I want people to note her language. The past 24 hours have been traumatizing for New Yorkers, and my administration will spare no effort to ensure the victims of this act of terrorism by a white supremacist are receiving all the resources and support they need. The entire world is watching how we will come together as New Yorkers to overcome this unthinkable tragedy. So again, white supremacist this, white supremacist that, right? Okay. So he had been buying ammo. He said he didn't get serious till recently, January of this year. And he talks a lot about the Great Replacement. Now, the Great Replacement is an entirely different thing than the Great Reset. I've seen people use them interchangeably, and it only does a disservice for when we talk about these things. The Great Replacement is this fear that the white population is getting replaced by minorities and other people of color, and that it is white genocide, right? And it's here where they start pivoting to Tucker Carlson, how this is a talking point for Fox News host Tucker Carlson, as well as many prominent conservatives. So as you can see, that's where they're going with this, right? CNN also talked about his gear. He was all geared up. He arrived at the store around 2:30 p.m. and he had the helmet. He had the camera that was live streaming his actions. He had an assault weapon. So he had an assault rifle. And he first shot 4 people outside of the store, and 3 of them died from their wounds. And then when he entered the store, that's when he started fighting with the armed security guard. And then he shot more people, 6 of whom also died. So that's how you get to the total number. Now, here's the thing. This is where it takes kind of like, for me, a really weird situation, because he started live streaming this attack, right, on Twitch. We get banned on Twitch, and a lot of people get banned on Twitch for cursing, right? Something as stupid as cursing. He was able to live stream this on Twitch. And yes, they took it down eventually, but he was able to do it live. And I find that really interesting, and I find that really suspect, coming from a platform as strict as Twitch that has banned people for saying like curse words. So that's interesting. Twitch accordingly said that they were devastated to hear about the shooting, and said that the user has been indefinitely suspended from their service, and that they're taking appropriate action, including monitoring for any accounts rebroadcasting the content. So now we're not allowed to see the content. I don't know, Pasta, if you have anything to say about the Twitch thing.
Well, I'm just going to say this one thing really quickly. I'm going to let you keep going on because I'm taking a ton of notes, and I'll take some time up at the end. But they said, oh, now you're not allowed to see it. It's been out there. A lot of people have seen it for quite some time. I have a feeling that they wanted you to see this one.
Right.
Really, it was too easy to see this one. Now they might make it a little difficult after everybody saw it, but everybody's enraged from it. But just to kind of point that out there, that it was like, And when you see this one, you get very, very angry. Go ahead, fam.
Right. Okay. So now we're at the point where we're going to discuss this manifesto, right? And we're literally just discussing what is written there. I'm not putting, anything into it. I will say a couple of things I find very interesting and timely with everything that's going on. So this is a black sun. This is what we're going to talk about in a minute, that people who have been covering Russia and Ukraine were pointing out. This is exactly much of the insignia that the Azov battalion wears. And this is a Nazi symbol. And he has it on his manifesto, where it says, you wait for a signal while your people wait for you. This also reminded me very much about the last Batman movie, where there is a scene in the movie, multiple scenes, where every single time this killer, right, goes out and kills people, he starts live streaming it. And that's part of it as well. Pasta, real quick, I got to plug my computer unplugged. So
I'll riff, and I'll talk about the manifesto too as well really quick, because I really, 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 really question a lot of these things, these manifestos, and they come out. It just, everything seems so complete and organized and order. And I'm not saying it's going to come from this gentleman whatsoever, but these things just make me very suspicious, because they provide all the weaponry, everything that they need, that the government needs or anybody needs to push forth on those civil liberties or those Second Amendment, restrictions, which is, something we always have to watch for. Fam, you ready?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say this obviously happened. People obviously died. When people talk about false flags, that it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that there was a manipulation. And I'm going to go through the manifesto and I'm going to let people decide what for themselves. And then we're going to go through a couple things. But this is what it says. So he says, if there's one thing I want you to get from these writings, it's that white birth rates must change. Every day, the white population becomes fewer in number. To maintain a population, the people must achieve a birth rate that reaches replacement fertility levels in the Western world. That is about 2.06 births per woman. And he links to a Wikipedia article. The only white country that reaches these levels is Argentina at 2.247. Argentina isn't necessarily a white country, but historically, Argentina is the country where lots of Nazis escaped to. Argentina, parts of South America in general, but particularly Argentina was the heaviest. And when you go to South America, you will see a notable difference in the appearance of Argentinians versus literally everybody else. So even though it's technically not a white country, the majority of their population has more traces to Europeans than the majority of the populations elsewhere in surrounding it. And that's also part of, you know, the operation. So, okay. But not in Europe, not in the rest of the Americas, not in Australia or New Zealand. White people are failing to reproduce, failing to create families, failing to have children. But despite the sub-replacement fertility rate, the population in the West is increasing rapidly. How is this possible? Mass immigration and the higher fertility rates among the immigrants themselves are causing this increase in population. We're experiencing an invasion on a level never seen before in history. Millions of people pouring across our borders illegally, invited by the state and corporate entities to replace the white people who have failed to reproduce, failed to create the cheap. I think then he talks about labor and stuff. But I want to kind of just comment on that a little bit. The reason why Tucker Carlson is getting a lot of blame for this, for some people who are well-intended, is because Tucker Carlson has talked about the borders, right? He's talked about how there's too many people coming in and how they're allowing them in. And those are the times when I've disagreed with Tucker Carlson. And I've, you know, said, oh my God, this is disgusting on the shit he's saying, you know. However, it is interesting to me that that belief that does exist in a lot of conservative circles where they are afraid of being replaced by all these immigrants is so pointed out perfectly in the very first page of his manifesto. Either this guy really got influenced by this sort of thought process, which is totally possible, or you know,
what?
the other
What?
possibility is that somebody you know, helped influence him, and then of course you for a specific narrative, for a specific point. Because I'm not saying people don't believe this, because they do. There are a lot of people who believe that in these things, right? But you have to look at the timing of everything as well. So he says the crisis of mass migration and sub-replacement is an assault on the European people that, if not combated, will result in the complete racial and cultural replacement of the European people. To see this in full effect, you only have to look at the population statistics in the nations for the year 2050. So he goes on to talk about that. Then he talks about himself. He says, my name is Peyton Gendron. I was born on June 20th, 2003, which makes me 18 years old as of writing this. He's like so young. I am the sole perpetrator of the recent attempted mass shooting. That one right there is really interesting to me, because whenever there's a mass shooting, there's always a question of, was there multiple shooters? Were many people involved? Right off the bat, he says, I am the sole perpetrator of this attempted mass shooting. I lived in Southern Tier, New York all my life with both my parents and two brothers. I believe I am ethnically white, since my parents' nationalities are from Northwestern Europe and Italy. Sorry, pasta. I graduated high school with a Regents diploma with advanced designation, and am currently, I think he studies at enrolled in Sunny Brooms with a major in engineering science. I would love to continue this, but there are bigger problems I am more concerned with. I am not a warfighter, nor have I been enrolled in any military or tactical training. So excuse any mistake I make during my attack. I was never diagnosed with mental disability or disorder. The guy didn't have a record. He's 18, obviously. And I believe to be perfectly sane. I recently took an MBTI test as seen below. This is a test that all of us have taken, I think. I remember we all shared our results at MCSC. Pasta's an ENFP. I'm an ENFJ. I don't know. I don't know everybody else's. Misty is like something, but we all realized like we were really similar, which is really interesting. But I love how he put that out there, right? I think it's interesting. And then he put his picture and he put that he showed himself as just like a white man seeking to protect and serve his community, his culture, his people, and his race. That is like, you know, that's part of their belief. They believe like this is, you know, we're the race we need to protect because we're genetically superior. And he goes on to talk about how the white race is genetically superior through genetics and phenotypes and all of this crap that we're not going to go over today. But there are some things that you know, he started talking about. Was he answered the questions from the people questioning him, because he was always on Reddit and 4chan. And he mentions this. 4chan is one of the go-tos for where liberals and a lot of people on the left say that, oh, anything from 4chan is this right wing, and they're creating this white supremacy and the incels and all of that. So it's very interesting to me that he's hitting every single check mark that a liberal or a leftist would be like, see, this is exactly why conservatives and Tucker Carlson and them must go. I just think it's so perfectly like every single check mark. So yeah. So he talks about wanting to reduce immigration rates to European lands by intimidating and physically removing the replacers themselves. This is why he's carrying out this attack. He wants to agitate political enemies. He wants to incite violence and further divide people between the European and the replacers. So he wants to divide and incite violence. And he's literally saying that that's what he wants to do. And he also says to create an atmosphere of fear and change in which drastic, powerful, and revolutionary action can occur. Notice how he uses the word revolutionary. To add momentum to the pendulum swings of history, destabilizing and polarizing Western society, to eventually destroy the nihilistic, hedonistic, and individualistic insanity that has taken control of Western thought. Interesting how he's using individualistic in this sense, in the negative sense, right? Because normally individualism is what libertarians and some of the right get like chastised for. Oh, you don't care about other people. You don't care about giving healthcare to people. In this sense, he's saying individualism is destroying them because they need to care about the white race and this collective good. And what does he want? He wants to ensure the existence of their people and the future for white children. And also, who does he represent? Millions of European and other ethno-nationalist peoples that wish to live in peace amongst their own people, living in their own lands and deciding the future of their own kind. And they asked him if he's a part of any group or movement. He said he's not a member of any organization, though he supports it. And did he align himself with others? No, he's the sole perpetrator of this attack. He kept saying that. Anything on that, Pasta?
I'm gonna hold it all until the very end. I got all my notes here and stuff like that. I've just been paying attention to the chat. But go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So he says, where did you most get your current beliefs? And he says the internet. This is like, I mean, if I'm reading this as a person that doesn't know everything I know, right? He said the internet. He talks about revolution. He talks about every single check mark that if I'm State Department, national security state, I'm like, oh, see, we can't have the internet be free anymore because this guy got his education off the internet. He said there was little to no influence on my personal beliefs by people I met in person. I read multiple sources of information from all ideologies and decided that my current one is most correct. Did you carry the attack out for fame? He said, I did it so I can influence others into defending themselves from the replacers. Why did you target those people? He says there are an obvious, visible, and large group of replacers from a culture with higher fertility rates and strong, robust traditions that seek to occupy my people's lands and replace my own people. It would have eased me if I knew all the blacks I would be killing were criminals or future criminals, but then I realized all black people are replacers just by existing in white countries. So this is what he wrote. And obviously that's ridiculous and terrible. But But it's just so awful that he's specifically signaling Black people when we know that the United States has this huge issue right now where when we talk about police shootings, when we talk about racism and all of that. I mean, it just falls perfectly into everything that we're talking about. Over what time span did you plan the attack? I've been passively preparing for this attack like every American does by having ammo, but not till January 2020. All right, so then they talk about the firearms. So I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so he talks about the place of attack. He had redacted it, and he didn't give it out right away. He said, "Do you consider this an attack of terrorism?" And he answered that he did, by definition, that it's a partisan action against an occupying force. Did you personally hate Blacks? He said, a Black man or woman living in their homeland, no, but them choosing to live in his lands, yes. And he said he hated more of the converts, those from our own people that turn their backs on their heritage and their culture. So that's kind of like he sees anybody that is allowing this as the converts. And did you or do you personally hate foreigners or other cultures? He said, no, many people and their cultures are great, but it's important to note that they can only be great, stay great if they are separated from each other. So he believes in separation. Do you believe those you attacked were innocent? There is no non-white living on white lands that is innocent. So, I mean, clearly his belief is really, really there. And they asked him, was the attack anti-immigrant in origin? And he said, yes, beyond all doubt, anti-immigration, anti-ethnic replacement, and anti-cultural replacement. So he's basically telling people like that he's this racist and he's very proud of what he stands for. Very much like the Azov battalion has zero problem telling people who they are and what they stand for, right? And he talks about the police officers that he said he didn't intend to kill them, but if he'd had to, it would make him upset. But many of them work for the elite. Notice how he mentions that they serve the elite. That's very interesting because a lot of the things we talk about the predator class, the elite, the 1% being in charge of this, right? And it says here he intended to plead guilty. He didn't. He's not a Christian. He considers himself a fascist. He considers himself a white supremacist. He considers himself racist. He considers himself intolerant because that's part of what the virtues of a dying nation. And are you an anti-Semite? And yes, he does. So he's hitting all the boxes. Look what he says. He says, I wish all Jews to hell, go back to hell where you came from, demon. And, and he has a whole section on Jews and Soros and all of this. He admits he supports neo-Nazism, but he isn't a member of any groups. Is he a conservative? No. He says, conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it. Are you homophobic? He says, I believe that the problem involving the LGB, drop the T, are very insignificant. If one is actually part of the LGB group and they are loyal to their people, that is fine with me. Transgenderism, however, is a mental illness and should be addressed as such. So he's hitting all of again, more and more check marks. Are you right wing? Depending on the definition, sure. Are you left wing? Depending on the definition, sure. This part here was weird because it's like, normally you would read this and be like, oh, okay. Right wing, white supremacist. He's saying no. He's saying he could be left wing. He could be right wing. And then they ask him if he's a socialist. And he says, depending on the definition. Workers' ownership of the means of production. It depends on who the workers are, their intentions, who currently owns a means of production, their intentions, and who currently owns a state and their intentions. So this guy fashions himself that he could be a socialist too. I don't know. If I were writing this to try to get every single group that's anti-establishment into the criminal fold, he's doing a great job. He's hitting every single possible threat to the status quo, whether it's on the right, these ultranationalist groups, or whether it's on the left, the socialist groups. By living in the United States, weren't you an immigrant yourself? He says, yes. Immigrants bring a host of issues, but then he talks about being that they're white and that's different. Is there a particular person that radicalized you the most? So he talks about this guy named Brenton Harrison Tarrant. and that Brenton's live stream started everything you see here. Brenton started my real research into the problems with immigration and foreigners in our white lands. Without his live stream, I would likely have no idea about the real problems the West is facing. So he puts down people that influenced him, which is great, because now they're going to say, oh, see, like, this is such a big problem. They're being influenced by other shooters. And were you taught this violence and extremism by video games, music, literature, cinema? No, only the truth caused me to seek violence. That's very interesting. What does he mean by the truth? The truth, you know, like things like on the internet that now they're trying to censor everything they can. So perhaps the truth is now going to be vilified even further, because that's what we've been seeing so far. So this is a very important part I want to read, because they ask him, did you always hold these views? And he says, when I was 12, I was deep into communist ideology. Talk to anyone from my old high school and ask about me, and you will hear that. From ages 15 to 18, however, I consistently moved further to the right. On the political compass, I fall in the mild, moderate, authoritarian left category, and I would be preferred to be called a populist. Guys, he literally hits every aspect. Anytime the you know, some of us talk positively about some conservatives and how like they kind of, we could sort of work with them on some issues, but not on others. And, you know, Pasta called them even once a populist, right? And like how they're just going with what most people in their country want. They're trying to figure out how to work together. He talks about the populist. He also talks about the authoritarian left. And he also talks about communism and having a belief in communist ideology and then moving to the right. So they're basically showing this. If he wrote this, I mean, this is like, he's basically laying it all out, that there's a pipeline from communism to like this white supremacy is basically what it looks like to me. And if I'm reading that and I have no idea about everything I have an idea of, and I'm like, wow, it seems like these extremist beliefs sort of lead you to become some sort of white supremacist, right?
Mm-hmm. I didn't know what I know, fam, is what you're saying.
But I know what I know. So I'm like, wait a minute. This is like really weird, that the timing.
Little sus.
And I'm just like, you know, and I'm not Steve. And I'm not Pasta. And I definitely, I have a different
off on you.
way of looking at things. But reading this manifesto really did it for me. Reading everything that happened and all the you know, all the facts and everything, that didn't do it for me. Reading this manifesto, though, if you go through the manifesto and you see all the check marks this guy ticks for the State Department, I'm just like, okay. So let's continue. I'll try to like be pretty quick about this. Were your beliefs given by your family, friends, society? And he said, no, politics was never discussed in my family or old friend group. Who do you consider white? Those that are ethnically and culturally European. Who do you consider non-white? Those who are not ethnically or culturally European. He doesn't consider himself a leader. Then he names all the other partisan freedom fighters and ethno soldiers. He names Brenton Tarrant, as he said, Patrick Crucis, John Ernest, Robert Bowers, Philip Manhouse, Luca Trainey, Anders Breivik, Dylan Roof, Anton Luden, Peterson, and Darren Osborne, etc. I never had any connections with the other confirmed partisans, though. And then he talks about how he's American, so why does he care so much about Europe? And he says the United States, just like the rest of the colonies of Europe, is simply an offshoot of the European people, a finger on the hands of the body of Europe. The origins of my language are European, my culture is European, my political beliefs are European, etc. And my blood is European. So there you go. That's why he thinks he's European. And he says, they ask him, what are your views? And he says, I would prefer to call myself a populist, but you can call me an ethno-nationalist, eco-fascist, national socialist if you want. I wouldn't disagree with you. So there, not only does he mention populism, he mentions socialism. And you know how a lot of people on the right have said, well, Hitler was a socialist. So, I mean, socialism is bad because Hitler was a socialist. And this whole thing, it's just so insane to me. He's pretty much making it a crime now to call, or at least a very suspect to call yourself any of these things. If you call yourself a populist, you call yourself a socialist, a communist, a left-wing whatever, then you could potentially be labeled as one of these people. And the State Department has started doing this for a while now, right? And January 6th was one of the events that they did use for that. So they ask him, are you a Fed, shill, Mossad, agent, fake, false flag, patsy, imposter, Antifa, 3-letter agent, blah, blah, blah. And he said, no, I don't think so. Who knows? Maybe it's the 2 shots of COVID vaccine juice going through my bloodstream that's really making me do this. It's healthy to have skepticism, but don't let your skepticism turn you away from people who support you. So this one right here too, maybe the 2 shots of COVID vaccine juice going through my bloodstream really making me do this. It's almost like he's mocking that. And we know from what's been happening this whole time that that's an ongoing thing. And I have a hard time believing that somebody would write that. It just seems so out of character to me.
Fam, what are you saying, fam?
It just seems extremely out of character the way this was typed out. It doesn't seem like an 18-year-old would do this. Now, if I'm a very smart 18-year-old, and there's a video that Pasta sent me, right? That this gentleman, this black gentleman that talked to him for like 45 minutes the day before, claims to say that he was wearing a Genius shirt, and he concluded this guy was a genius just by talking to him. Now that very well could be, but this is very interesting. What do you encourage us to do? Make plans, get training, form alliances, get equipped, and then act. The time for meekness has long gone since past. The time for a democratic solution has long since passed. Men of the West must be men once more. This is right here, similar to when we were talking about January 6th and they were saying, oh, everybody's got to come up and go and show that we won't stand for this. And, and the whole mantra, you will not replace us. Just everything that exists. It's real. There are groups that are like that. We've seen them in Charlottesville and all of that, but not like this, and not in such a timely manner. And as we're finishing up here with this manifesto, I encourage you guys to go read it. I will put the link in the description.
People are asking for the link. So
yeah, I will put the link in the description. Let me finish up reading this. I'll put it in the chat. Okay. And then Pasta, you can talk about what you're going to talk about. So won't your attack do more harm than good? No, there isn't a successful influential grand movement established just yet, and no leading organizations. So there is no great structure created that could be brought to harm. As for how the public perceives us, do they perceive us any different after the attack than they did before? Won't your attack result in calls for the removal of gun rights in the United States? Okay, this is the one. Yes, that is the plan all along. You said you would fight to protect your rights and the Constitution. Soon will come the time. Okay, so that part right there, well, duh. Like this is going to cause, again, the talk of taking people's guns away and blah, blah, blah. Now, the reason people don't want that is because we have a government that people don't trust. So people don't want to let go of the only protection they have. They want to be able to have the right to bear arms. They believe in the Second Amendment and et cetera. And every time a mass shooting happens, they attempt to take more and more of those rights away. So he's saying that, yes, but that's the plan. When they take it away, you guys are going to fight back, right? So this is somebody that's, if he's real, he's trying to incite a civil war, what would happen if we have a civil war, guys? The government would literally take over and take everybody's shit away, and we would be under complete and total control of the state. That's what would happen if there was a civil war. Like it's just, that's what would happen. So it doesn't make sense that somebody that wants to have these rights strengthened would just go about doing it this way. Do you actually believe this garbage? Somebody asked. Yes, I have never felt more sure about anything else. Democracy is the only solution. Why are you committing to force? Democracy is a mob rule, and the mob itself is ruled by enemies. The global and corporate run press controls them. The education system long since fallen to the long march through the institutions carried out by the Marxists controls them. The state, long since heavily lost to corporate backers, controls them, and the anti-white media machine controls them. Do not suffer under the delusions of the efforts, riskless democratic victory Prepare for war, prepare for violence, prepare for risk, loss, struggle, death. Force is the only path to power and the only path to true victory. I mean, this is like, he talks about the corporate media. He talks about the Marxists feeding right into that, right? Feeding right along into that whole narrative. And he said violence is the only way to make real change in the world. The reason why peaceful protests are allowed is because they don't make an actual difference. And then he talks about haplogroups, phenotypes, and globalized testing, talks about the racial differences, and then he goes on to talk about them. And then they ask him, why do you blame immigrants and not the capitalists? He says both are the problem. And I would like to address the concept of hard and soft targets here. Hard targets are people with strong political powers, such as the presidents, prime ministers, judges, media producers, and military leaders. Soft targets include the everyday man with low, weak political power. To cleanse an area, both must be removed. One cannot only attack the blacks of Buffalo and expect the Zogbot government to fall as well. Just as one cannot attack the Zogbot government, and he's talking about the Jews, and expect the blacks to fall. Both have to be addressed. I am simply attacking one at a time. And yeah, so, okay. So let's move on to the very last one. So then I can put the link in the chat. And he said, they asked him, was there a particular event or a reason you decided to commit to a violent attack? Before I begin, I will say that I was not born a racist nor grew up to be a racist. I simply became a racist after I learned the truth. I started browsing 4chan in May 2020 after extreme boredom. Remember, this was during the outbreak of COVID. I would normally browse K because I'm a gun nut. And then, and he said there, I learned through infographics, shit posts, and memes that the white race is dying out. And then he talks about the elites, and he talks about, he found the World Truth videos and the daily archives. He says we are doomed by low birth rates. And he mostly would get his news from Reddit. He learned more and more and realized how serious everything was. And then, he mentions Brenton Tarrant again, and found the 17-minute live stream of him attacking the Al-Noor Mosque, and read his manifesto and agreed with a lot of it. And so, this is, he mentions 4chan. He mentions Reddit. He mentions extreme boredom and shit posting and memes. This is how things people do on the internet. Like everyday people, they go on these sites. It just seems so weird to me that that's being mentioned so specifically, that this guy would just mention every single thing that the State Department could use against us very specifically. And then there's a picture of his gun where it says BLM Mogged, and then you can see the names of some of the people he's admired. So Pasta, go ahead and take it away while I put this in the chat.
We're going to put that in the chat. Thank you, Sam, for all that, laid that out, and doing all that work, reading that manifesto. Just kind of what some people said in the chat. We can go off this right now. This is a situation, we had some other videos, other things I want to talk about today, but I want to be very, very careful, right? I don't want to get us a strike today, get us taken down and whatnot. And these things, they get very, really tricky with YouTube. They're just waiting in the bushes, waiting to take people down. Well, let me just talk about some of the stuff some people said inside the chat, because they go along with a lot of the notes. And that's why, we talk about some of the MCSE across the board, our audience, our followers, and people in the chats, some of the smartest people. Steve Cutler did jump in right away and said, the manifesto seems sus. Yeah, it's Keel Jones in the Rokfin chat says the FBI who wrote his manifesto. And people also talk about why the FBI gets to continue to operate, to why they get the budget they do and stuff. They have to have a reason for doing so, right? The more money they can get, the better. And these are things you have to look at. And Deep Space did ask, he said, was the FBI grooming this kid? And the almighty Antichrist said they certainly knew about him, which they did too as well. So they knew about him, number one. And a lot of people feel maybe, hey, he might have been groomed or something. That's it. Jilly Love mentioned MK Ultra. And Sterling said, what about Samuel Hyde? And this is something we talked about the other day. When it comes to that manifesto, it's, a lot of people are bringing up that name right now. So just go ahead and look into that yourself. I'm not going to talk about it more. But there are a lot of things that are kind of very suspect about that manifesto. When you didn't talk about the weapons, the funny thing about it is I think they were laying out a list of guns
Yeah.
they want to ban. You know, if you go to slide 53 really quick, Oz, I just dropped a picture in there really quick. You know, the 3Ds or the 4Ds of the whole situation. When we have a crisis, they try to divide, disarm, distract. And in our case, they try to demonetize. But the weapons that could be banned and stuff like here's Kamala Harris right out of the gate, next target, banning AR-15 style assault weapons and stuff. So you hear this rhetoric come out every single time there is. And then you hear the conservatives always go, oh, a good guy with a gun. We need a good guy with a gun. And one of the things that's so suspect is taught that he went to this one particular area. And we did have the gentleman who we talked to for, it was actually an hour and 45 minutes with the Genius shirt on too as well. He passed through many black areas, fam, before he got to this one. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, that's something that Steve pointed out. And also something I want to point out too as well is that, you know, with somebody mentioning the MK Ultra thing, you don't even need to do that nowadays. You have people on edge. I mean, this place is about to blow. I told Oz that's my song. Everybody's on edge. There are so many people there who are over medicated, just about to lose, about to snap. So all they need is a little push. You know what I'm saying? So you don't even need to really go in deep inside the paint to get people to do the things you want to do nowadays. It's, you know, there are so many things that are happening left and right that you just have to go back and you have to step back and you have to look at it. And what happens right out of the gate? You got Kathy Hochul talking about more censorship, you know, pointing the finger. A lot of lawmakers, fam, they started pointing the finger at social media again. So here they're ready to come on in there. You know, like I said, the divide, disarm, distract, demonetize. They want to take away more freedoms on the internet, take away more speech, more press, less the controlled speech and propagandists. They have what's going on. And it's just a big distraction from a lot of things going on, like what we're going to talk about next with the whole Ukraine situation with Pfizer data dumps and all this stuff like that. We're not talking about things we need to talk about. They threw the Roe v. Wade thing in. Now they have that. You know, and right out of the gate, when you look at this manifesto, it's just very divisive right out of the way. It's trying to push that race war, you know, that a lot of people feel that's kind of like, you know, on the surface over there that we're on edge and we could blow. So that's just all the notes I just took down to as well. And I want to say special love to Lucky Burrito, Miguel H. William Wallace, Deep Space, and Keem James hanging on out in the chats today. I've been looking at your information and all the stuff you guys been chatting about. Play nice in the chat, but certainly just the tip of the iceberg over here. We don't want to go much further than with that right there. But these are a lot of things out there. They're just they make you scratch your head and you go, holy shit, this just seems just too perfect for the security state to do whatever they want to fucking do now, fam.
Yeah, and the only thing keeping me from that is the fact that there is that connection to the Azov battalion, and that is a very real thing, like the Black 13th Son. But real quick, because we do have a guest coming on soon, I want to show some of the pictures and some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So there's a picture of him getting arrested, right? At slide 32. And you guys can see that. Okay. So one of the main things that I noticed right away is that the media was completely trying to turn this into Tucker Carlson and Russia. Tucker Carlson and Russia. So, you know, the Buffalo shooter who just killed all these people literally had the same insignia. And we just talked about that, right? And Ukraine Maps pointed that out. Ukraine Maps is an account that is now suspended. And they were suspended, according to his Telegram, because of the Nazi ties they were putting with this shooter. And he talked about that, right? He talked about the fact that this was the same logo, right? That was used. And this is the Black Sun logo. So that's something to point out. And here is a deeper picture, right, of this. So this is the Azov battalion, a sign, and you guys can see the insignia there. And I'll just read a little bit of what it says. It says, it's the Wolf's Angel, a German heraldic charge inspired by historic wolf traps adopted by the Nazi Party, used prominently by Wehrmacht as an SS unit. And that's the Black Sun. That's a variation of the sun wheel. It's an extremely popular and extensively used neo-Nazi / white power extremist symbol, famously used in the armor and weapons of the Christchurch mosque shooter Brenton Tarrant, who killed 51 and injured 40. If you guys remember that, this is the guy he constantly mentions in his piece. Now, that's the only thing that sort of deterred me from thinking, okay, Is this some guy that's like pushed by the FBI? But they're pushing it onto Russia. I'm going to point out how they're pushing it onto Russia. But before I do that, I have to point this out because this is to me the most idiotic response I've seen on Twitter. And I have to go over some of these idiotic responses coming from the left and coming from socialists, right? Because they want to say this is a conservative problem. This is a blah blah blah. In the guy's own manifesto, he's talking about everybody. He's talking about being a part of multiple groups, not a single group, but being influenced by multiple groups. So Jordan says, folks more focused on Buffalo Shooter's gun having the black sun symbol the Azov battalion uses, which has been used since Nazis invented it in Germany, than the actual white supremacy terrorism that just happened and is spreading across America needs some fresh air. Again, it's this type of concept that makes it seem like this issue isn't even a foreign policy problem, right? And because even if it is a false flag, it's still a foreign policy problem. Because this is all about control. This is all about the surveillance state. This is about shutting down your ability to have any sort of defense, your ability to have a dissent, your ability to have anything. So if it is real, then it's a foreign policy problem. If it's not, it's still a foreign policy problem. But people on the progressive left, they don't see it as anything outside of the domestic issue. They want to focus on the Trump supporter being a white supremacist. They want to focus on Tucker Carlson being a white supremacist. And he continues, I know it's in a political debate these days. The go-to move for a growing number of people is whataboutism or changing the subject, but a white supremacist who literally hunted black people and wrote a manifesto that sounds eerily similar to your average Tucker Carlson monologue is the story here, not Ukraine or the Azov battalion. The people making the Azov the focus are either doing so intentionally to ignore the increasing white supremacy right here at home or are missing the trees from the forest. So I guess Nazis that this country is funding plays no part in creating this similar type of killer, right? Plays no part. You don't think that the fascists in the State Department are a problem? You don't think that those are actual fascists, the ones creating this sort of behavior all over the world, and then now in this country and weaponizing whatever they're weaponizing to meet a sort of agenda? That's not a problem. But like, let's focus on the Tucker Carlsons of the world. He's exactly the kind of person this sort of thing works for.
Oh yeah. And you should tell him by his first name, fam.
Like this is scary. This is the scariest thing. We need to go after Tucker Carlson. The right, all Republicans. No, dude. No, you're looking at this from a one-dimensional perspective when it requires several.
It's because his name is Jordan the White Knight Sheridan, and that's what it is too. It's a very, at best, it's a narcissistic thing to kind of make it about this people. Like, oh my God, this is a problem everywhere. You're talking about the actual white supremacist mentality. I mean, I thought Nazis kind of promoted the Aryan race, the Aryan army. No, fam. I mean, I'm just this shit is just like, wow. And you don't know if he's just motivated because, his significant other is a spook, or he's doing it because he wants to just, he's a narcissistic asshole and he wants to just bring attention to himself and what a white knight he is over here. I don't know. You tell me. So.
Well, he went after Glenn Greenwald, and I don't have it on here, but he was like, I used to talk about being part of the Intercept, but I'm glad I didn't because Glenn Greenwald, blah, blah, blah. I mean, sure, Jordan, now, don't they welcome you all the time? I mean, you're perfect for the Intercept, give up whistleblowers, dox people. I mean, it's just perfect. Here's this person responded, the reason people are connecting the two is because the U.S. is sending billions of dollars worth of weapons that will fall into neo-Nazi hands that use the same black sun symbol. Also, many in the media deny a neo-Nazi presence in the Ukrainian military. So this is why people are saying, wait a minute, this is hypocritical. You guys are going to clutch your pearls about this kid. Like, you literally are funding worse trained military, paramilitary fascists in Ukraine, and you're pretending that they don't exist. But now you want to focus on the white supremacy in this country and in this kid and all this whole thing. It's like, it doesn't add up. It just doesn't make any sense. How are you going to do both? You can't do both. You can't be funding neo-Nazis on one end and then being appalled that one takes a very similar belief that he literally says it's from Europe. Like, it's from, like, they can't deny that this comes from Europe because it does. And then you're going to say, oh, this is a white supremacist domestic extremist problem in the United States. No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, there's not, it's ridiculous. And then he points big name figures doing it. Like, come on, just name the names, Jordan. Just name the names. So again, here's a side-by-side picture of the mass shooter Nazi terrorist in America. This is what he's considered. Mass shooter Nazi terrorist in America and the hero in Ukraine. I mean, this is literally what we're supposed to believe, right? Yeah. Nobody here is saying that this is a good thing, that this guy is innocent. No, that's not what people are saying. But it's hypocritical at the very least on that aspect of this whole thing, that they're doing this, right? Now, of course, the media takes this and finds no time to wait to blame Russia on this. So Russia, according to Business Insider, could strike back at the West by calling on its network of white supremacist groups to commit terror attacks there, an analyst warns. So now Russia is in charge. And then the next one, as Russia's Ukraine invasion stalls, the Kremlin could call on military groups or militant groups to foment violence in the West, experts warn. They don't talk about which experts warn. Like, who are the experts? They never mention them. I read the whole article. They don't mention them at all. A former U.S. intelligence official warned of a likely bid by Russia to stir political violence. 2 Russian groups currently fighting in Ukraine have ties to the far-right groups in the U.S. and the Western Europe. But they don't talk about the Azov battalion, right? They list paragraphs of the troops in Russia, but they don't talk about the Azov battalion. Here they say experts are increasingly concerned, again, who are the experts, that as Russia's invasion stalls, the Kremlin could choose to retaliate against the West, not just through economic, diplomatic means, but also incite in violent attacks at the heart of the NATO alliance. The tool it could seek to exploit is a network of neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups in Russia, Western Europe, and the US, with which it has cultivated ties for decades. There are literal documents and information talking about how the CIA has trained these radical groups, these Nazi white supremacist groups. They've come here and they've trained.
And they fund them all in the global South too.
And they fund them all in the global South and in West Asia.
Oh yeah,
we've created these radical actual
extremists. Yeah, West Asia. You're right. My bad.
No, yeah, but they're talking about them, Russia, right? And it's just like, wait a minute, but where's your article on the Azov battalion then? So be fair to then do a whole article on Ukraine. And here it says, Chris Chivius, who served as a National Security Council's intelligence officer for Europe from 2018 to 2021, said they've done that before in much of Europe, and I would not be surprised if they are doing it today, trying to get their intelligence services at the right moment to get these groups agitated. This is exactly what the U.S. is doing. Who's funding the Azov battalion? It's not Russia. Who's funding Nazis? It's not Russia. Are there Nazis everywhere? Of course there's Nazis everywhere. But like, there's only Nazis in Ukraine that are in control of the military and in control of the government, that are holding their own president as prisoner because Zelensky can't do anything against the U.S. They'll whack him. He can't do anything against the Nazis. They'll whack him. So the guy's a prisoner himself. Whack him. That's apostasm. That's the whack him. Okay, so then they say they could offer the Kremlin a potential route for inflicting violence and chaos in the Western nations, providing key diplomatic and military support to Ukraine while maintaining plausible deniability, experts say. I don't think anything's beyond the pale for Putin. I mean, look at this language. I mean, this is ridiculous. And they put this out right at the same time that this is going on. So what, that whole, okay, well, the Azov battalion, why would they incriminate themselves? Oh, no, because they can take the Azov battalion and turn it around and say, nope, this isn't the Azov battalion. This is Russia's Nazis. This is Russia doing this. And that's exactly what they're doing. So now we have Russia and Tucker Carlson, and they have tied Tucker Carlson to Russia already. So
we just tied Jordan Sheridan tied him to white supremacy, and a lot of people who wave their fingers at imaginary Nazis do that anyway. So sorry, but yeah.
Yeah, and as we finish up this section, I do have to point out, that some of these socialists are the ones about putting this out, and that was Jordan Sheridan, who's like progressive, and this is Carl Beeger. I forget how to say his name. So he went after Wyatt. Beeger, whatever. Because complains here. Carl Bichet complains that so many on the left focus on what he calls the narrow problem of arming fascists in Ukraine, before insisting that the U.S. government sending guns to Azov militants is certainly not uniquely dangerous or uniquely hypocritical. And yes, and he talks about this in his article. So he writes, less than 5 minutes after news broke of the teenager in New York had murdered 10 in a mass shooting, Twitter found a way to blame it on Ukraine. And he puts out Ukraine Maps' tweet, and where he said he was inspired by the Azov, aid and right sector in the Ukrainian armed forces. And then he goes on to talk about Wyatt, and he says, shortly thereafter, the same account added inspiring lone wolf shootings to its list of war crimes by Ukrainians, which is true. Mm-hmm. This narrative was dutifully promoted by Russian state media, doesn't name Wyatt, but links to his tweet. Of course, and it's not hard to understand why, blaming the killing on Ukraine is meant to further justify Russia's invasion as a necessary campaign of denazification. No, Russia's invasion, whether this guy shot people or not, is something that you could say they were provoked. Whether you think it's an invasion, whether you agree, they had reasons why they did it, and they laid out those reasons, and we've talked about them ad nauseum. This has nothing to do with that. This is just showing the hypocrisy of Western media and Western politicians in continuously funding Nazis and then complaining about Nazis killing people and having this whole manifesto and then weaponizing that manifesto to further take away our civil rights and our civil liberties and impose a bigger mass surveillance state that we're seeing becoming more and more authoritarian each day. So if you want to talk about fascists and Nazis, well, I think it's the ones in the State Department and the Pentagon that we have to worry about more.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so then he leads with, why have so many on the left confined their response to the Buffalo shooting to the narrow problem of arming fascists in Ukraine? Sending guns to Azov militants is dangerous and hypocritical, but it's certainly not uniquely dangerous or uniquely hypocritical. Like, what the hell does that even mean? What the hell does that even mean, Carl? Right. Carl, like, what do you mean
uniquely dangerous?
So you add the word uniquely and now it means something different? Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? It's like, oh my God. And it's like,
it's a parody of himself.
It's a parody. The whole thing is a parody. And then he goes on, I'm concerned about the way socialists are navigating the politics of international fascism because I want to see the fascists lose everywhere. But more broadly, I am concerned about how easily the socialist critique of fascism and imperialism slips into the nationalist partisan framework of bourgeoisie discourse. The points we make about these issues shouldn't sound exactly like what Republican capitalists say or what Democratic capitalists say, or what capitalist militaries fighting nationalist wars have to say. We're socialists, and we should sound like it. You don't sound like a socialist. You sound like a completely brainwashed, propagandized liberal. And it doesn't matter at this point. I don't care if you call yourself a socialist or anything at this point, because look where we're at. We got this guy who calls himself a socialist advocating that what's happening in Ukraine isn't uniquely hypocritical or dangerous. What? Like, what world do I live in where there are more Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and what's his name? Matt Gaetz. Yeah. Well, yeah. The libertarian Rand Paul that, Klaus and I would always argue over, but they are more anti-war than Carl because they see a problem with the funding of this whole thing. And they're not denying, a lot of the time, they're not denying this as much as the Democrats and the leftists. And so Alex posted a really great comeback saying, I don't know. I feel like a Nazi doing a mass shooting in Buffalo is good to bring up the fact that the U.S. government is arming and supporting Nazis abroad. I mean, it's just ridiculous because that is exactly what the U.S. government is doing. And just to go off of the really good tweets I saw, Ricky Rance put out this tweet and I immediately was like, yes. He says, so they keep letting murderers murder so they can ramp up the surveillance state. Got it. And that sums it up, guys, because if there was a way to solve this, guess what? The United States is a fascist, military, entity. I mean, we may not get the brunt of it, but people abroad sure as hell get the brunt of it all the time. Mm-hmm. We create and arm radicals all the time. So what makes you think we wouldn't do it at home? And what makes you think that it doesn't have a purpose? Because all I've done here is lay out the many facets of this whole thing, and you can decide for yourself. But at the end of the day, after everything that's happened, this whole situation is going to be weaponized, whether true or not. It will be weaponized against the American people, and it will be weaponized against any sort of anti-establishment, entity that we have. And I just wanted to show, and you guys should go back and read this article. This is a Time article that talked about literally in depth how white supremacist militias use Facebook to radicalize and train new members. And this was put out in 2021. And they talk about the recruiting and training in August of 2019 with the military wing of Ukraine's far-right Azov movement, which has inspired white supremacists from around the world. They literally say the Azov movement has inspired white supremacists from around the world. The guy goes on to talk about how he came in and that they noticed the swastika tattoo on the middle finger of this guy's left hand. And it didn't surprise him. The recruiter had made no secret of his neo-Nazi politics within the global network of far-right extremists. He served as a point of contact to the Azov movement, the Ukrainian militant group that has trained and inspired white supremacists from around the world, in which Fuller had come to join. Fuller is a person that is talking in that article. Now, I want to say this. The government is not interested in ending these extremists. They're interested in creating more of them. That's very clear. When they talk about, when you see these politicians say, we must end white supremacy, we must end this, and then they continue invading Somalia, they continue bombing other countries and creating radicals, guess what? They're not interested in it. They're only interested in saying this and weaponizing it and politicizing it to make you believe that they're interested in it, but that's not part of their plan. It's not part of their plan at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't be funding Nazis in Ukraine. Right. And so this is how they talk about the Azov battalion now, post-war, as of April. This is from the Washington Post. Right-wing Azov battalion emerges as a controversial defender of Ukraine. Militia with far-right views says it welcomes all volunteers, regardless of ideology, in the fight against Russia. Look how positive they point them out, fam. It's just a militia, and they're welcoming to all ideologies.
Just nationalists, fam.
They're just a militia. They're welcoming. They're not, Nazis that have the same insignia as the guy that just shot up. I mean, this is like, it's just comical. And also, of course, as Pasta mentioned, Kamala Harris's next target is banning AR-15 style assault weapons.